Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Massive drama coming out of Interlagos again. The sprint race hugely controversial today. The virtual safety car timings have got Red Bull basically in uproar, especially after Verstappen's penalty to demote him down to 4th place in a very dramatic race indeed. But nothing else happened on track for the rest of the day. No qualifying session for the main Grand Prix because of the rain. What are the FIA doing? Why do these Pirelli wet tyres simply become useless for some reason when the FIA stewards arrive onto the circuit? But also, if there's no quali today and there's no quali tomorrow morning because the weather arguably looks even worse, how will they set the grid for the race if the race even happens? If they do set it, they might well set it by FP1 is the current rumour. That would mean Norris starting on pole, Verstappen starting P20. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We've got to rattle through the topics today because wow, a lot's happened. Firstly, Sauber, Bortoleto. Rumour has it a Brazilian driver might be back on the grid. He's done very well in F3, now in F2 as well, and I guess Sauber are thinking, well, if we can't get Colapinto with what he's proven to do, why not get Bortoleto, someone they've thought about before. This would of course mean getting rid of Valtteri Bottas, which would be a very unfortunate set of circumstances for him, but given that Sauber are bad, I kind of get it to take some chance on some younger talent. Bottas, what would he do? Maybe reserve at Mercedes, could be the partner to Max at Red Bull. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. Yesterday, you guys saw this, we mentioned it in the video, Horner walking, and well, you can see how he's looking at the cameras here thinking, they're on to me, right? Leaving the Williams hospitality area. The theory was that he's talking to James Vowles about the services of Franco Colapinto within the Red Bull family going forwards. But, you know, the theory was then proposed, well, what if there's more to it than that? What if actually what he's talking about is Carlos Sainz? Because it does make sense now, given that Red Bull clearly needs 2 drivers to win the Constructors' Championship. They need someone else that's good alongside Max. Now, yes, Jos Verstappen and Carlos Sainz Sr., they had their drama, but it's a long time ago now. Maybe they've moved on. I don't know, intrigued to your perspective. But this has been the latest rumour today that maybe Red Bull are thinking about putting Sainz back in the car alongside Max. Because it could potentially be a sensible decision, right? And say to Williams, hey, I know that you signed Sainz, but we want him now. And you've got Colapinto there instead. So why not just keep the Albon Colapinto lineup? We'll have Carlos Sainz and solve a problem for you, which is going to come up down the line in a couple of years anyway. So it might make sense, that negotiation. Intrigued to your thoughts as ever. Bit of drama as well. I mean, this is usually drama, I might say, for the Monday, but it's just like there's going to be more drama Monday. So we've got to talk about it now. I don't really know if we know for sure who these characters are, but on Instagram today, there were some comments that are deemed to have been from 2 Red Bull mechanics on opposing sides of the garage. And, you know, this guy, Moonlight Dali, says, what's Checo's garage doing after the drama of yesterday's sprint quali? And this guy says, giving him the same tools as Max, and this other guy replies and says, why are you lying for? Now, these guys are followed by a number of definite Red Bull engineers and mechanics and stuff. So there's a theory that these are 2 guys from opposing sides of the garage. And apparently this Greg Greason guy was like in the replies to lots of people, you know, yapping all sorts of stuff. So I don't know if there's anything in it, but it seems like the Red Bull drama has made its way outside. I mean, like, Red Bull are in complete chaos. We know that. They're always in chaos. Sometimes it's controlled chaos and they win. Sometimes it's not. This is another one that, again, I might have saved for later, but we might as well talk about it now because it's another storm in the paddock brewing today, that Red Bull are now accusing other teams of cheating again. They've done this before. They're now going to do it again. Now, what I find funny about this is it seems to me that whenever Red Bull accuse somebody else of cheating, it's because they probably tried it themselves. And apparently that's true again today on this one. So the rumour has it, now this is unsubstantiated, hopefully we hear more about this over the coming days, but Red Bull suspect that teams have been putting basically some water into their tyres. As outrageous as this sounds, this is the funny thing about Formula 1, isn't it? Like, there are basically infinite ways to potentially cheat, and all the time there are new ideas. So Red Bull think that through the valve of the tyres, the teams have been putting a few drops of water in the tyres to help with the degradation and stop them overheating. Of course, McLaren have great pace, it seems, towards the end of stints. So Red Bull suspect that other teams have been doing this to control their tyre temps. Now, is there any evidence for this? No. And the rumour has it that over the last couple of rounds, this has been monitored by the FIA. And the FIA have said there's no evidence they're doing that. No suspicious activity has been noted by the team. And Pirelli say that there was not a single suspicious incident this year. So it seems to me, to be honest, that Red Bull have just come up with this, that people are saying, oh, Red Bull have lost the plot, complete head loss, right? They're just seeing ghosts and saying, oh, well, they must be cheating or something by putting water in the tyres. What are we talking about here? Apparently, it wouldn't take much to have a consequence, have an effect, and it would be a very interesting way to cheat, but apparently it's not happening, and that's the general theory in the paddock, that people just think it's much ado about nothing, basically. Apparently, this is the funny thing, which is classic Red Bull. Like, as soon as I saw this story, I knew that this is what was happening. Allegedly, Red Bull used to experiment with this trick, filling water in the tyres in the past, when it wasn't technically illegal yet, because according to the regulations, it must just be air in the tyres, right? And it suspects that former employees that went to other teams are using the trick in a better form. So this is the thing, it's like Red Bull, they tried it first, they tried to cheat first, whatever, and some of their former employees have now gone to McLaren, Aston Martin, whatever, other teams, and they think, therefore, that those guys have, told them what they were doing on some level. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about that in the comments below? Do you believe it? I don't buy it until I see any evidence that this is happening. Then I'm not sure. And obviously, you'd be adding weight to the car as well, putting some water inside the tyres. But I guess it would pay off by the less tyre deck. I don't know. Bit of a confusing one as far as I'm concerned. But let's talk about the sprint, because this was in many ways the most controversial thing of the day. Honestly, the most controversial thing nearly happens turn 1, when Max gets a pretty good start, sends it down the inside of Charles, because he knew that if he wanted to do some damage on the McLarens, he probably had to overtake Charles early, if not at the start. Turned out the Ferrari race pace was not as good as I thought it would be, and not as good I think as Ferrari thought it would be. So I imagine they're going to make some changes, but then again, they may have just set their car up for wet conditions, but then again, you can change that after sprint quali if you want. So yeah, Ferrari weren't as impressive today as I expected they might be around here, so it turned out Max got another chance, but he suns it down the inside of Leclerc to try and say, okay, get to P3, then I can deal with Lando. And he nearly just takes Lando out. I mean, Max goes in heavy into turn 1, big lockup, wasn't far off, taking away the rear from Lando Norris, which would have been insane drama to start out the race. But effectively, not much happened really at the front of the field. There's a bit of drama further back. Hamilton had the car's seemingly a disaster around here. Hamilton was like, it's the worst race that I've had in so long. And Mercedes had an awful time around here last year too. I think McLaren would have hoped the Mercedes were better so they could maybe take some points off Max. That's not how it looks. Or maybe they can, depending on how quali goes for tomorrow's race. But the McLarens did well. They held on to the 1-2, just like I said yesterday they needed to do, and they had some opportunities here if they wanted to swap the cars. This was one of the main pieces of drama, really, right? Because McLaren had the opportunity to swap the cars pretty much around about this time. So Max was closing in on Leclerc, Sainz was dropping off. You can actually see Sainz just about here in the background coming around the corner. So it was pretty clear that, Max was going to end up faster than the Ferraris. So if they wanted a time to swap the cars at McLaren, because they were always going to try and give Lando the win, every point matters, this was probably when they should have done it. They should have said, all right, Oscar, nice 1-2. Our gap to Leclerc is like 1.5 seconds. It's not much, but they could have done it. I also think, given that the pace of these front 4 cars were very similar indeed, I think there's an argument that what they should have done is swapped Piastri and Lando. And if you do that during the race, obviously you lose Piastri a lot of time in this scenario. But potentially, Lando could have then kept Oscar in his DRS, and then Oscar could have kept Leclerc in his DRS, and then defended for Max, and then ended up, Norris P1, Max P4. That's what happened anyway, but for different reasons. So I think, again, McLaren mismanaged this, and Norris was on the radio saying, guys, we talked about this, why are you not letting me through? And of course, in the dirt, yeah, Lando's tyres were struggling a bit, and, Piastri was having to slow down to keep Lando in the DRS. So it was all kind of controversial, really, because of course both guys are fast, but I think right about this point in the Grand Prix, they should have probably swapped it then. Their plan was go to the ends, and then literally on the final lap, just before the line, Piastri will allow Lando through for the win, which is the cleanest way to do it on some level, because you're not losing Piastri loads of time. you're not allowing him into the clutches of Max, which is what eventually happens later in the race. But still, again, when it comes to handling these situations, McLaren didn't do the best job. And Lando was on the radio saying, I don't know what we're doing here, guys. Like, we talked about this. Why are we not executing? And Norris was being told, keep an eye on Leclerc. But, of course, he doesn't want to focus on Leclerc. He wants to go further on. The Ferrari race pace was probably okay. It's just their temperatures were getting hot. The track was hot, the conditions are hot, and they were suffering temperature-wise, because it is also a bit above sea level into Lagos, I think, compared to, not as much as Mexico, but I think to some degree, compared to most tracks. So, yeah, temperatures were struggling. In the rain, that's probably fine, but maybe that's a decision that Ferrari decided to make anyway. Then we got the big drama, though, right? So, Nico Hülkenberg, he pulls off the track, he had an exhaust problem, and he's out of the Grand Prix, out of the sprint race, because it's not technically a Grand Prix. Whatever, it was a race. Now, Hülkenberg pulls over just towards the end of the second sector, in a position, it's not on the racing line, the cars go on the other side of the track here. But still, his car was literally here, the track is literally there, and he's right next to the track. Now, 2 laps after this happens, they were waving double yellows, double waved yellow flags, be cautious, be careful, and it's not like this is an incredibly rare phenomenon. This does happen, and it has been done, of just, the car's in not the worst position ever, double yellows, you don't need to safety car it necessarily. But I think the argument is, look, have we learned our lesson here from some of the things that have happened in the past? We've got to be careful in these situations, right? As soon as I saw Hülkenberg pull off, I thought, all right, they're going to drop the VSC. They didn't. They waited like 2 laps until this happens. Obviously, as we see at the front here, Lando and Piastri have swapped around as they eventually did. This actually happens right here when, as the VSC, they expected a VSC or a safety car to fall. They swapped the drivers around. But, I mean, at this moment, it's a yellow flag, no safety car, and Hülkenberg is out of the car walking around. Like, all it takes is for Piastri here to be looking at Nico, maybe, as he's coming out the corner, because if you lose it on this exit, like, let's say you lose the rear, you put the power down too much, you spin off into where Hülkenberg is. That's how it works. Like, that's what would happen anyway. If you lost the car on the exit, now you probably wouldn't, but it's like in the freak occurrence that you do, you can't be having a guy just walking off the track while it's still racing conditions. Like, and I think the FIA saw this image and they were like, we got to drop the yellow, right? We got to drop the VSC. And that's what they did. So it was literally 2 minutes after Hülkenberg pulled over that the VSC fell. And of course, very conveniently for McLaren, they'd made the decision because they thought, well, the VSC might come, a safety car might come, let's swap the guys now. So if it finishes under these conditions, then Norris gets the win. That they did. Of course, it put Piastri back into Verstappen's clutches. And then just as Verstappen was maybe going to be able to make some impressions there, then the VSC fell, which neutralized the Grand Prix for a couple of laps. So, the timing here was very interesting. Again, the question is always, should you assign to malice what can be explained by incompetence? And I think that sums up the FIA quite well. Is it rigged? Is it unfair? Because we've talked about multiple incidents over the last few years that seem to favour various drivers. Sometimes Verstappen, sometimes others, sometimes Norris, maybe in recent times. Is that intention from the stewards, or is it just that they're incompetent? It's probably more likely the latter, to be honest, given that every fan of every driver seems to think on some level that the FIA is biased against them. They're probably just incompetent. I think that's the most reasonable explanation here. And Lawson was on the radio saying, wow, the timing of the VSC is crazy, which it was. Then the next drama happens, though, is the end of the VSC. Now, to be fair, on the end of the VSC, it does go random. It does go green, apparently randomly, completely randomly. They say the VSC's ending, and the exact time that it ends, apparently nobody knows. I don't know if someone actually does press a button or whether it is literally like an AI-generated algorithm decides. But the drama was, of course, that Max was trying his best to stay as close to delta neutral as possible, right? So pretty much when a VSC happens, you get a time on your dash. You've got to stay within that time. So you get a minimum lap time that you can do when you have the VSC active, which is, of course, substantially 30% or so slower than normal racing conditions. So if your driver in front is half a second away from their delta, if you're right on it, you can gain half a second over that stint on the guy in front. And Max, what he was hoping here was that he would floor it and he would hope that the green dropped right when it needed to, and he was going to be able to get a run on Piastri. So at this moment, the VSC, you guys can actually see VSC is still said here. He was alongside Oscar Piastri here, trying to go into turn 4. He has to back off though, because he knows that he can't overtake, and just as he backs off, that's when the green flag pops in. So again, the timing here was sensational for McLaren. The VSC ended at just the right moment to allow Piastri to stay ahead. And from there, it was, no one else was going to win other than Lando. No one else was going to get second other than Oscar. The drama, though, was that the FIA said as soon afterwards as this happens, is that Max was then looked at for impinging on safety car rules, basically, under VSC rules. And the theory was that, well, it was because he was alongside, which isn't allowed. Now, that is said under safety car conditions, but not for VSC conditions. But my feeling was it was probably something else, because anyone watching that realised, hang on a second, Max was like half a second back before the VSC, and then as the VSC ended, he was literally right on Piastri. So in my head, I'm like, he must have been very, very close to his delta time. And it turns out that that's exactly what happens. Max ended up being 0.63 seconds, I think, faster through that VSC stint that he should have been. And this is a slam dunk. If you're faster than the delta time when the green flag falls, it's a slam dunk 5-second penalty. So that's what happens. And because he only finished 4 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc, that means that Verstappen was demoted down to 4th. So that became 4th for Verstappen, ahead of course, Leclerc initially, but then he was dropping further back. So Norris wins. McLaren get away with it, right? They made a bit of a mess of it, but they got there. They got the 1-2 they wanted. They got Norris the win, and with Verstappen's penalty, and it's interesting, right? Why did Verstappen feel the need to do this? He had a comfortable 3rd place, but I guess, his racing instinct really kicked in, and again, like, the way that Verstappen's driven the last couple of weeks has been somewhat F1, F1 game-esque, right? Some of the activities in Mexico. And then here, like, this is the type of stuff that I would do in the F1 games, right? So the VSC's ending, well, like, let me just send it up the inside to see if I can get the move to happen. But, of course, you've got to respect the delta. So that gives him a penalty, and he gets a penalty point for this as well, which is somewhat notable because he now has 7 penalty points. If he gets to 12, that's a race ban. I would argue that in Mexico, he only got 2 penalty points in Mexico for both of those incidents. I'd argue he should have got at least 4. And if he'd got 4, he would have genuinely been close to a race ban here. Could you imagine a world in which Verstappen was to get like a race ban for Abu Dhabi and like Lando just has to score an open goal basically to win? That would be quite the timeline. But the positive for Max is that he had pace. He was probably the fastest man out there, to be honest. And that was a surprise, to be fair, that in these conditions, because the Red Bull didn't look so good in quali, I didn't think it would look so good in the race, probably look worse, I expected, but no. So that's very promising for Max if tomorrow goes as he wants it to, or if there simply is no race at all, because it rained a lot and it was absolutely pissing it down. And look, again, this is the world we live in right now. If it rains too much, unlucky, no racing. And it was not going to stop racing or raining anytime soon, so the racing wasn't going to start. Again, the best way to clear the water is to get the F1 cars on the track. Would it have been very treacherous and dangerous? Sure, but the drivers want to race. They're down to do it. Lewis Hamilton was talking to Domenicali saying, look, you should have sent us out. This is insane, ridiculous. We want to go out. I want to go out. You better give us wet tyres, or basically better wet tyres, because everyone knows the wet tyres are useless, and even Pirelli seem to know this as well. It's actually an embarrassment, I would say, to the sport, because the wet tyres are never used. Either the track is good enough for inters, and if it's worse than inter conditions, they just don't race because it's deemed too treacherous. Even quali was deemed to be a serious problem today, and Hamilton was like, okay, it was half like in jest here, but I think he was being dead serious on some level. They're like, this is outrageous. Like, I'm trying to put you guys on the spot. So that's another conversation, really. Unfortunately, we know how the FIA are. They will want to run a race tomorrow, obviously. The question is, what's that going to look like and how are they going to set the positions? Because they want to run quali tomorrow morning, right, before the Grand Prix. The problem is it's going to rain tomorrow morning and it's going to rain during the Grand Prix. So what do? If qualifying can't happen, the rumour is that they will go back to FP1. Now, this isn't, I'm not sure, confirmed, because apparently it's possible to use classification to the previous session. So they could potentially use sprint qualifying, but there's other people that say no, they can't, because the way the rules are written, they have to use the earlier session. So it's not exactly clear, and people seem to be a little bit debating this right now. But it doesn't seem impossible that they could use the FP1 standings to set the grid for Sunday, and the FP1 standings were Norris P1, I think it was Norris, Russell, Behrman, wasn't it, right? P1, P2, P3, which would be wild. And then Verstappen was 16th, but with his 5-place pin, he'd be starting right at the back. So, seems doubtful. The main problem is, do we even get a race? And obviously Lando needs a race. Like, he needs to gain points on Max. You know, hopefully they don't do that horrible Spa 2021 thing again. But this is the calendar. Like, arguably tomorrow's worse than today by the numbers. So, yeah, I don't know what the FIA are going to do. I think they're going to try their best to run a race. There might not be a qualifying session. And what that means, I generally have no idea. So, a dramatic day as ever here with the Brazilian Grand Prix. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.